Hello guys, welcome to the fourth episode of the series. I really appreciate the support so far, the views and the likes. Thank you. So in this episode, we'll be looking at the invoice page, which has the functionality for both the client and the employee invoices. As usual, I'll be starting with the Webflow part first, then Xano, then Wized. So inside of Webflow, we have 30 sections: the top, the middle, and the bottom. In the top section, there is a title and a button that will trigger the modal. The modal is a modal that has the form to send invoice to clients, and inside of it there's a title, a text field. It's given a with attribute of invoice title field, and we have another for the amount, and we have a select field. This select field, we are using we are creating it customly with a custom code because we want to use the option in it to render the list of clients, and Webflow is not going to allow us to do that. It's not going to allow us to give with attributes to the options inside the select element. So we are creating it by default. We have a select element, and a lot of attributes. ID, name attribute, the class. The select itself is given with attributes, and inside of it we have value. We have options. We have an option, and the option is given with attributes of client select option. So it is that option we are going to use to render the list of clients, so that we will be able to select from that list the clients we want to send an invoice to. We have a very simple date input. There is a type of date and given with attributes, and the text area that is being used for description is also given attribute of description field. And as usual, we have our custom submit button with studio form attributes, sf submit, an error, and success state. Okay, that's that about the send invoice form. In the middle, we have a block to list all the invoices that are going out, the client invoices. We have a title, an input field for the search, and we have the element that we're using for the rendering, given attribute of client invoice elements. Inside it, there's a text block for the ID, another text block for the name, the title, the dates of the creation of the invoice, and status. So this status is also a text block. We are using combo class to handle the state of the status. If, for example, if the status of the invoice is awaiting, we are going to add combo class of awaiting, and we will change the text as well. If the status is cancelled, we're going to add combo class of cancelled, and we'll change the text. And lastly, we have a link block that we use to download the PDF document of each invoice. And at the bottom, we have almost the same block with a search input, a div block that has all the text elements for the invoice details. So this block is handling the employee invoice. We also have text block for the ID, the name, the employee name, the date, the status, and the button to show more details about the invoice. So the modal. Let me show the modal. So inside the modal, we have the invoice number, the employee name, the invoice title, the total hours, the total amount, description, the status, and we have a select. This one has static options, paid and reject. So whereby when an employee sends invoice, you can, maybe you've paid it, maybe that the invoice has been paid, you can change the status here. Or you just want to reject the invoice, you can change the status here. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all about this page. So now let's look at Xano. So inside Xano, first of all, we are using two tables inside the database for the invoices. the client invoices and the employee invoices, handling the two separately. Inside the client invoice table, we have a reference field that is making reference to the client table. We have the title, the description, the amount, status, the time of completion, the time of payment of an invoice, Stripe client secret. So we are making use of Stripe to handle the payment. So there is something from Stripe we are saving in each invoice field. So it's called client secret. So we get to Stripe later. The due date, the invoice URI. So by the way, let me just talk about Stripe payment intent. So we are making use of Stripe payment intent. Stripe payment intent is like a custom checkout in Stripe that can allow anybody to make payments. So when we create a Stripe payment intent, we'll be given this client secret. So it's like an ID that we can use to trace our payment intent. So this is the endpoint from Stripe we are using to create the payment intent. Okay, so let's move on. The employee invoice is almost similar to the client invoice table. We have title, a reference field to the employee table, which is the user table, the description, amount, status, and the hours. Okay, and the endpoint. So we'll be looking at this endpoints, client invoice and employee invoice. So the first one here is an endpoint to get all the client invoices record. We have three inputs: current page, per page, and search. So I have a simple query or record. The one here is called join. We are joining with client table because we want to be able to search by the client's name. And if we check our client table very well, there is no field for the client's name. So in order to have access to the client's name, to be able to search the client's name inside the client's invoice table, we use join. So join, we're joining with the client's table as client using inner type, where the client invoice as client ID equals to the client's ID. Then we have a custom query for the search, which is, now that we've joined, we have access to all the fields in the client table, which is, the query is the client name includes anything that is in the search. Okay, and the output, under the output, we are sorting by the time of creation in descending order. We are enabling pagination and including all the metadata and the total item counts. This and this will be overridden by whatever comes from the inputs. So this will be the current page and this will be the per page here. Okay, we are extending the clients by an add-on to have the name and the email, and here is where we are overriding the current page and the per page. For each item in the list, we want to format the timestamp to be in a readable format. So for each item, format the timestamp, okay, using this format MDY, which is month in full, day, and year in full. Okay, this is endpoint to create an invoice, a client invoice. We have this input: amount, title, client description, the data, due date, URL, and formatted amount. Okay, the first thing is we are making an API request to Stripe. So the first thing is we are creating our payment intent with Stripe. So as I've said earlier, we'll be making requests to this endpoint. We'll be passing the amount, currency, and some other inputs. What you need, we go to your Stripe dashboard. We do not need to create any products because this is a payment intent, not the Stripe checkout. So we need the secret key. We'll be needing this later, the publishable key. I'll get to that. Copy that. So we are making a request to this endpoint. Payment intent is a post request. We are passing the amount yeah, using the amounts from the input, and we are multiplying by 100 because Stripe receive amount in cents, and $1 is equal to 100 cents. So we multiply whatever amount by 100. We're setting the currency, which is, this is static. We are setting it to US as USD. We are including metadata. It's just an some additional info with our payment intent object we want to create. Then we are passing authorization. I've saved my secret key in the environment variable. You can find the environment variable here. When you go to settings, environment variable, manage, create a new one. I've created one for the Stripe. Okay. So I'm passing authorization, bearer, and percentages. This allows the user the function printf, which will replace whatever percentages is in your value or text. So we are going to replace it by the environment variable Stripe secret. Okay. After that, we get a response from Stripe. We are saving it as API 1. Then we get the client's record using we have the client ID. Yeah, using the client ID from the input. Then we are creating the invoice itself. So the created ads will be now client ID will be the ID from our input, the title from the input, description from the input, as well as the amount. The status will be static, which is awaiting. The completed ads will be hidden because is for when the invoice has been paid. The client secret, we get that from the response from Stripe. So using dot notation, we will trace it to the client secret. The due date will be from the input. The invoice URI is a link to download the PDF document of the invoice. So we get to that later. Then we want to update timestamp from both of these to be readable. The other 3 endpoints, we will get to them later. Okay. And let's look at the employee invoice endpoint. So this is almost similar as the query or record for the client invoice. For the employee invoice, here also we have the current page per page and search inputs. Yeah, it's almost the same setup. We are joining by the user table, so we'll be able to have access to the username. We want to be searching by the username. Yeah, we're also extending by add-on because we want to have the name and the email. We are enabling pagination. We are sorting by the invoice ID in descending order. Then we are formatting the timestamp so that it will be readable. Okay. I think we should just move to Wized now. We will be coming back to Xano. So inside of Wized, let me reload the page. Okay. Inside of Wized, the first thing we want to do is to get the list of the invoices. Okay. So we want to get the list of client invoice as soon as the page starts loading. We will create a new request to make a request to this endpoint, get all client invoices. So now let's create a new request. I've created mine, I've named it get client invoices. I've selected the app, which is a Xano Endpoints. The method is a get method and it requires authentication. Yeah, get method and the URL endpoint, client invoices. Copy that, return it here. Okay. Then we have some URL parameters, the per page, the current page, and the search. So the per page, we are returning a variable. So you create a new variable called item per page. Right now the initial value is static, which is 4. That's why you see 4 items per page. If I increase it to 5 or 6, you will see 6 here, or 5. Then the current page is also, we are also returning a variable called current page. The value is also static. We are returning 1. So that means on page load, it will always return the items in the first page for us. So we are always going to start with the first page. Okay. So for the search, I'm returning this input field. It has been given with attribute of client invoice search input. Okay. And we are passing our auth token for authorization. Yeah. So this request, we want to trigger it as soon as the page starts loading. So I have my events here. I've put them in a folder called the invoice folder. So everything happening on this page and in this folder. On page load, we have the on page load event. When the page starts loading, we want to make sure it's this page, app/invoices. Okay. When the page starts loading, we want to perform requests to get all our invoices as soon as the page starts loading. And also we want to get the employee invoice, but I'll get to that later. And we want to set the variable for our page loader to be true. Remember I said when the variable is true, the page loader will be hidden. When the variable is false, the page loader will be visible. And the variable is always false by default. So when the client invoice and the employee invoice request has been requested and the requests are okay, we want to set the loader variable to true so that it's going to hide the page loader for us. Okay, then we have another event that every time the get client invoice request finishes, we want to save the list of the invoices in a variable called invoice list. So we are returning this, which is from the request data. Now let me clear it and demonstrate. We go to our data store. Let me search for there's a bug with this. Let me just clear it. Okay, so I will look out for it manually. Get client invoices. Here is this. Then we expand the data to this is what we are looking for, the items. As you can see, we have arrays, we have array of items. So we select this one, and if we check, we have array of the client invoices. Okay, and also we want to set our total item because we will be using it for the pagination here. So also we from the request will be returning us the total item that is returnable. Currently it is 41. Okay. Yeah, so let's go back to the page load event. Yeah, we have, after we've gotten the client invoice, employee invoice, and we've set our loader variable to be true, we want to run this code. The code is the one responsible for the pagination. It's a little bit lengthy, but it's not complex. So we have also included the code here in the Notion page where we have all the code used in this project. So go to invoice page, pagination using request data for the client invoice. So this is the code. The first thing the code is doing is making sure we have the current page variable, the item per page variable. There's another one called is loading variable. Okay, there is a div block I've not talked about. I'm coming. So this one is the one housing, like it's the wrapper for the pagination. So it has been given with attribute of pagination container. So the code is also looking for that. Its response is important. Okay, let's go down a little bit. So when a next or previous button is clicked, what the code is doing essentially is when I click next, it will grab the current page, this one, and it will add one to it. As you can see, it's added one to it, and then it will make a new request using the current page. Now it is no more one, it is two. So the current page now will be 2, and the page returned from the request will be the second page. If I click on 11, it will set the current page to 11, and it will load the 11th page for us. So that's what the pagination is doing. And also it's very wise. It's the one that is creating this UI. It's creating the number, the div log, and everything, the over interaction. Yeah, so essentially that's what the pagination code is doing. At the bottom we also have the pagination code for the employee invoices. Okay, now let's look at how to create client invoice. Okay, so we as I've gone through it in Webflow, we'll be using this form to create a client invoice, to send invoice to clients, to create and to send invoice to clients. Okay, so we have title, amount, a select which we built customly to render the list of our clients, a date input and description. So let's look at the request to create client invoice. And we're gonna copy this endpoint URL, we return it here, and we'll be passing the authorization. Since it's a post, we'll be passing the parameter true body, we'll be passing the amount, the title, the client, which will be whatever we select from the client select inputs. Now let's look at how we use that custom code to create the client select input. Okay, so we'll be going to our elements panel. So you can remember, let me show the model inside of Webflow. So we have option that we've given with attribute of client select option. We'll be looking for that inside the elements panel. Client select option. Yeah, so we'll be using that client select option to render the list of our clients. Remember, we have a request that get on the list of clients in the clients page. So on this page too, we'll be triggering that request. Let me look for that request. Get all clients. Yeah, get all clients. So if you remember, on page load inside the clients folder, we want to make a request to, as soon as this page starts loading, the clients page and the invoice page. So if we check that get all clients now, we should have the list of our clients. Yeah, we have them. So we'll be rendering those lists using the select we created. So we will select the options. We are going to render a list. We will select the clients list, get our client.data.item. As you can see, we have a list of the clients. Then we want to set the text. Yeah, because we want to be able to recognize which clients, or else we just have a list of objects. So we only want to set the text to be the client's name. So we'll select. Remember, we are going to use an index variable for indexing. So we'll select. So let me clear this and redo it. Okay, I'm looking for get client. Gets all clients. Where is it? Yeah, this is it. Get all clients. Data. I just want to select the name. Yeah. So we'll be replacing this index by the index variable feed dot client select index. Okay. Then lastly, we want to set the value of each option. So when we select an option, we want the value to be the ID of each client. So it's returning the ID. We can set the option to be the name too if we want, but in this case, it's only the ID that we want. So we will be returning the ID of each client using the index variable as well. Okay. So we'll set a new HTML attribute for the option, which is value. So inside of Webflow, we've set the value to be empty. So we'll be setting the value here inside of Wized. Okay, yeah, so that's how we created the dynamic select inside of Wized. Moving on, we have the due date and description. So let's go back to the request to create invoice, create client invoice. So we are passing the client ID using our select. We are passing the description, the due date, and the formatted amount. So this I can't recall where I'm using it currently, but it's just to format. Let's say we have 10,200. It will format it in a standard way. It will be 10,200 now. Yeah, so I'm using the US format. Okay, so and our form has been given, the old form has been given with attribute of client invoice form. So we'll be performing an action on that. We will select the client invoice form itself, client invoice form. We go to the event tab. So using our custom studio form submit event, SF submit, we will prefer to default. So on submission, what we want to do is we want to create the client invoice. So let's me do that invoice form. I will select myself. Okay. And on submission, we want to show our loader. Yeah, the button loader. We want to set the visibility to be visible if the create client invoice is requesting. Our success state should be visible if the create client invoice is okay. Our error state should be visible if the create client invoice as requested and there is a message and the client invoice is not requesting, and the text will be set to the message returned from the request. Okay, now when I create a new invoice, it is successful. Yes, it's successful. Now we have a new invoice for demo created today, December 24, and the status is awaiting. Okay, now let's go back to the event, the submit event. After creating the invoice, we want to clear the feed, the title, amounts, all the feed, we want to clear them. And also we want to refresh the list of our client invoice list. Okay, then we want to generate a PDF document for the invoice. Now let's look at how to do that. We are using an external tool called Generate. So it's a very good tool. It generates document dynamically. It's a very good tool. It generates document dynamically, maybe invoice, letter, contract, agreement, certificates. You can use it for anything. So you can sign up right here, and I have my template here. So you will upload the templates in document in DOC format. So everything you want to make dynamic there, put it in delimiters, the invoice number, the client's name, address. We want to make those dynamic. Okay, so you want to go to settings and grab your API key. Okay, then also copy the template ID. Then let's go to API reference and see which endpoints we are dealing with. So we will be making requests to this one, to this endpoint /v1/documents. Yeah, because we want to create a new document. So we create a new app now inside of Wized. I've called it Generate. It's a REST API, and return this base URL, this one. It will stop at .com. So this will be the endpoint URL. So let's create a request to generate the invoice. I've created mine called generate C invoice PDF. Select the app that we just created now, and the method is a post. We'll be returning the endpoint URL v1/documents, and we are sending our API key as the authorization, and also inside the header we have the content type. We are returning multi-part /form data. You can find that here. Return this, and also we are including the accept, which will be application/JSON. Okay, so the body, the first thing is we want to return the template ID that we just copy. Return the template ID, so that will make it to recognize. Maybe you have many templates in your account, so it will recognize which templates you want to generate, which template you want to generate a dynamic document for. Okay, the output quality, we set that as maximum. The maximum is 100, the minimum is 1. Okay, and at the bottom, the output format, we are setting it as PDF, of course. Then the data is everything we want to make dynamic, so we'll be passing it, we'll be returning it as an object. So we are creating a new object here. So we return the title, the invoice number, the client's name, everything we want to make dynamic. Okay, so we are grabbing them from the create client request data. So the title will come from the request data. The invoice number is the ID of that invoice we just created. The client's name will come from the request data. If you remember, we are also returning the client's object, so we get the name from there, the address, also the contact details. The dates will come from the create client request data, the description, the amount, then the grand total. Then we have link. The payments link is simply the link that the clients will use to make payments. So inside of which we have a dedicated page for that. Inside of Webflow, we call it, not this one, we call it Stripe payments. Yeah, it is called Stripe payments, and this is the page loader. So when the page starts loading, we see the loader and this block. If the invoice has been paid, we will see this one, which is given with attribute of this. Oh, go back. Okay, we are using Stripe element to handle the payments. So we will create a Stripe element and mount it to this element on our page. The element is given ID of card element. Okay, and this button we handle the payment is given ID of pay button, and everything we are using this JavaScript to do everything. So that's one thing about the payment intent. You will handle the payment, the success and the error by yourself. So in contrary to the Stripe checkout page, whereby Stripe handles everything for you, including the success and the error. But here you do everything yourself. So what you will need here is you will need the publishable key. Where is Stripe? So you need the publishable key. Copy it. We'll be communicating with this js.stripe.com, and we are having this JavaScript that we grab the query parameter from the URL called pay ID. So if we go back to the link, we are setting a query parameter to be the client secret that will be returned from Stripe. So it will grab that client secret. That's what it will use to configure the payment element that will be created, and it will be mounted on an element on our page. If there is an error, it will show the error, and when the click pay button is being clicked, if it's successful, we want to show this. If it's not successful, we want to show error. And after that, we want to show the loader, the payments loader in the button. Then we want to hide all the payment wrapper if it's successful. And here we have the CSS at the head. Inside the head tag, we have the CSS for all those elements, these elements, and the Stripe element that will be created. Okay, so that's how we are doing the payments link. We are using a page that we've created inside our Webflow, and we are using Stripe payment elements to handle the payments, using the Stripe as client secret that is returned from the payment intent object that was created earlier. Okay, so we'll be sending all this data for our invoice generation. So if we go back to our event, our client form events, so after we refresh the list of the get client invoice, we want to generate the see invoice PDF. We want to generate the PDF document of the invoice. Okay, and then we want to click the close button by ourselves after 550 milliseconds. Okay, so the generate invoice request must have been triggered by now. So let's look for it. Yeah, it has been triggered, and it will return a link. This link, document URI. It will return this link for us to be able to download our document. So it is now that link that we are passing back to Xano, and we are saving it in this field called invoice URL. So there is, we can like create a new file itself, like create a file metadata inside of Xano, but I could not be able to do that because I'm not using a paid Xano account for this. So I'm just saving the URL directly in the field, and we can always download with that URL. Okay, so one more step is, after we've created this document, PDF document, we want to send email to client. Yeah, oh, hello, you have an invoice from so and this is the amount, and you can pay with this link. Let's close this one. Let's go back to the invoice folder. We have, let's look at the request to send email to clients. So we first look at it inside of Xano. We have this request, send email. Yeah, we have inputs, file data, the URI, the ID, client ID, the link, and the project name. And in the function stack, we are using try and catch. So why we are using try and catch is because our documents might encounter error and not be generated. So if there is no file, we want to make sure an email is sent to the client. So if you try this, if there's a file, you try this. If not, catch this one and try it. And finally, we want to save the download URL, the file URI in our database. Okay, the first thing we want to do is get the client record using the client ID returned. Okay, then we are passing the file data and what's inside the file data. So we go back to Wiz. As soon as we generate the PDF document, we want to do something. We want to grab that URI, download the documents, and convert it to base64, generate the base64, and also the meme type. So because in our email, the email service we are using, we want to pass in the documents. Also, we want to send the documents to the client. So we'll be passing the base64 version of that document to the client. So we are using loop for our email. If we go to the documentation, sending transactional, this is the endpoint we are using. Transactional, we're using transactional email, and we are attaching an attachment. So we will be passing the file name, the content type, and the data, which will be in base64. So this is what this code is doing. It is grabbing the URI, download the document itself, and converting it to base64 for us. So when it is being converted, it will save it in this variable called file data. Now let's look at file data. Inside file data, we have our documents in base64 and also the meme type. So we will then be passing that to this endpoint inside of Xano for us to be able to send email, to be able to attach that document to the email. Okay, so we'll be passing it as JSON. The first thing is we want to create a variable called file data. We pass that JSON to it, and now let's look at how we are sending the email. I've made it a function. Okay, if we look inside of it, let's look at how the email is being drafted. We said hello, we are passing the client's name dynamically, the project name dynamically, then the link to this button also dynamically, and we'll be passing the attachment too. Then for all email, there will be a transactional ID, then the email of the receiver, and the data variable, which will include all the dynamic value we want to pass. Okay, so we have email, transaction ID, data variable, and the attachment if it has an attachment. So we are making an API request to loops for us to be able to send email. It's a post request. We are passing the email, which we will get from the input. The transaction ID is static. Just copy it here, and then we are setting the data variable, which are going to be the dynamic values we want to pass, which is the client's name, the project name, and the link. The link will come from Wiz. And also we are setting the attachments. It will be an array, and inside that array we have an object. We have path of file name, which will be the name of the file. Also the content type and the data, the base64 encoded type of the file, and we are passing the authorization. You make sure you copy the API key of your account and save it in an environment variable inside of Xano, and that will be all. So one thing you can do is you can just copy this whole call, then import it here. It should structure this for you. Okay, so going back to our send email, as I was explained earlier, if we have a file, it will try this one. If not, it will cache this one, and finally it will save the URL of our download URL of our documents. So currently the invoice I created, which is awaiting, I should have received an email for it. As you can see, I've received an email which says hello, invoice for this is the title. So invoice for a demo is attached to this email. Click this button. So we also have our invoice that is being attached. That's amazing. Then if you look at it, we have an alignment issue here. This should be moved to this place. All the dynamic data has been replaced. The ID, which is the invoice number, the amount, the date, the due date, the grand total. Okay, you can download it and save it somewhere. Then now let's click here to pay. So as you can see, here's the link, and we have this query parameter, which has the Stripe client secret. Is grabbing it and is using it to create this Stripe payment element. Okay, but before we make the payment, let's look at how we are sending the email inside of Webflow. So we are passing the file data, this one, which will be the variable that has the file data. Then we are passing the invoice ID, which you are going to get from the create client request data. We are passing the client ID, the URI, the link. So the link will be this. Then we make this dynamic using template literal. So we have the query parameter equals to the Stripe client secret, then the project name, which we are also gonna get from the create client request. Okay, so now let's go back to our payment page. So we've looked at it, how it's been set up inside of Webflow. So we have a div block that we're using to mount these Stripe elements onto. And now let's make a payment. I'll be using the Stripe 01 2045. Let me make a payment. Okay, the payment is successful. If we go back to Wiz and we refresh the page, this should change to paid. This has now changed to paid. Now let's look at the fulfillment, because we've paid, and how does our backend know that there is a payment and that it should change the invoice back to the status of the invoice from awaiting to paid? So that's where webhook comes in. So for all successful payments, we are sending webhook back to Xano to communicate with Xano. And we have a successful payment and trace the invoice in our database and change the status to paid. So we will go to our dashboard. go to dashboard, and then we will want to come to developer. Come on. Then we want to go to webhook. Then we create a new webhook using this plus button. So we will, inside our Xano, we are going to create a custom endpoint, give it any name, copy the endpoint URL. After the endpoint URL has been copied, paste it here. Then we will look for the event. So the event is gonna be we are going to search for it. Payment coming. So payment intent succeed. Yeah, payment intent succeed. So only occurs when a payment intent has already been completed. Yes, every time a payment intent has been completed, we want to make a request to this endpoint URL that we pasted. Copy the endpoint URL, paste it, then create an endpoint. Because I've created mine before, we're just going to look at it. So every time the payment intent, a payment is made on a payment intent that was created, this will trigger the webhook. It will send an event to the endpoint that we included, that we use for the creation of the webhook. So inside the function stack, we are the first thing, we are getting the input from the webhook. Then we have a precondition which must be true, and it is that if inside the webhook we are going to, let me show you, we are going to have something like this input. So we are going to have something like this, the data. So it's going to be long. So we want to check if the status equals to succeeded. So that's what this one is. If the status equals to succeeded and the payload type equals to payment intent dot succeeded, if those ones are true, we want to go on and change the status of that invoice to paid. Okay, and how do we recognize the invoice? We recognize it by the client's secret, because that will also be included in the payload. So it will be here. So the client secret created earlier is very important. It's what you'll be using as the ID for the invoice. So we are going to use that to recognize the invoice, and we change the status to paid, and the time of completion, we get that from the payload, and we will multiply it by 1000, because to change it to milliseconds, because from Stripe it's not in milliseconds. Okay, so that's how we are handling the fulfillment. When a payment has been made, we change the status of our invoice to paid. And also we can download the URI, this one, using that link. You can download it. Did I even talk about I think I've skipped the rendering of the client invoice. So we will start with that from the next episode. So the series is getting long, the episode is getting long already. In the next episode we'll talk about that, and also rendering the employee invoice. Thank you so much.